All right, let's dive right in. Think about it. Just today, how many times have you looked at something visual? An article online, a chart at work, even just an app on your phone. Visuals, they're everywhere, right?
Constantly. I bet you can think of a time when a visual just, bam, made something click. You got it instantly.
Yeah,
But I'm sure you can also remember times when you're just staring blankly at a chart, an infographic, thinking, what am I missing here?
totally. Like there's some secret code I just don't have. It happens to all of us.
Well,
And that makes you think, what makes a difference? Why do some visuals just work and others fall flat?
it's a great question.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what we're tackling today, a how and the why. How visual displays, all those charts and graphs and images, actually affect the way we think and learn.
It all comes down to brain stuff, really.
Yeah.
To understand this, we dove into some fascinating research in educational and cognitive psychology, specifically a 2017 study by McCrudden and Rapp. They give us a really solid framework for this whole visual learning thing.
So basically what we're trying to do today is unpack how visuals influence those core brain processes, like how we choose what to focus on, how we make sense of it all, connect it to what we already know, and even how efficiently our brains process it. We're hoping that by the end of this, you'll not only grasp things better when you're looking at visuals, but also be a more aware, like a smarter consumer of all the visual information thrown at you every single day.
Absolutely. We're swimming in visuals these days. It's more important than ever to be able to navigate them effectively.
Okay, so first things first, how do we even begin to categorize all these different types of visual displays we encounter?
Well, McCrudden and Rapp break them down into two main categories, semantic and pictorial displays. And what sets them apart is how they communicate meaning.
Okay, semantic versus pictorial. Let's unpack that.
Sure. So semantic displays, they rely on symbols to convey meaning, most commonly text.
Right, words.
Exactly. And the meaning comes from those agreed upon conventions we've established. Take the word tree. Those letters don't inherently resemble a towering oak, right?
No, not at all.
We just all agree that those letters represent that specific thing, that concept. So when you want to communicate precise, abstract relationships, semantic displays are your best bet.
Okay, that makes sense. So, what are some examples of these semantic displays that we see all the time?
Oh, there are tons. Sequence diagrams, those are everywhere. They show how things happen in order, like the steps to bake a cake or the process of assembling a piece of furniture. Then you got your hierarchies or tree diagrams. They illustrate levels and categories, like that classic organizational chart in a company. And matrices, those are great for comparing things across different criteria. Think of a table that lists the pros and cons of different laptops or compares features of various smartphones.
Right, like a side-by-side comparison.
Exactly. And there are also concept maps. Those visually represent connections between ideas and graphs, which use bars, lines, and other symbols to represent data.
Okay, so timelines, branching structures, comparison tables, those are all semantic. Got it. And then we've got the other type, the pictorial displays. So this is where we're talking actual images, photos, illustrations.
Precisely. Pictorial displays use visuals that resemble the things they represent. Like a drawing of a bicycle looks like a bicycle, you know what I mean?
Right.
So if you need to quickly convey the appearance of something concrete or show how something works, pictorial displays are your go-to.
Okay, makes sense. So what kind of pictorial displays are we likely to come across on a daily basis?
Think about the photos you see in a news article, diagrams that explain how a car engine works, the little icons on your phone that represent different apps, or even those animated explainer videos you see online.
Right, yeah. The study also brought up this concept of fidelity, physical versus conceptual. How does that come into play when we're learning from visuals?
That's an important distinction. Physical fidelity means the image looks almost exactly like the real deal, like a super detailed anatomical drawing of the human heart. But conceptual fidelity, that focuses on illustrating how something works, even if it's a simplified representation. Like a diagram of the heart might not show every single vein and artery, but it clearly shows the chambers and the flow of blood, getting the concept across.
Right, so one's about visual accuracy, the other's about clarity of function. And it's interesting that you can have both in one display, like a labeled diagram of the heart. It's using both pictorial and semantic elements.
Absolutely. And that's where things get really cool. Different types of visual displays, whether they lean more semantic, more pictorial, or a mix of both, they naturally afford or promote certain ways of thinking.
Afford, that's a key word here. What does that actually mean in terms of how we learn from visuals?
Think of it this way. A visual's design kind of subtly nudges your brain to think in a particular direction. A flowchart with arrows clearly showing a sequence of steps makes it easier to grasp the order of events. It affords temporal inferences. As a matrix, with its rows and columns for comparison, makes it easier to see connections between different items. It affords relational inferences. Static images are great for understanding what things look like, their shapes, their position, while dynamic visuals, like animations, are better at showing changes and processes over time.
So the way the visual is structured actually primes our brains to process the information in a specific way. That's pretty powerful.
It really is.
Now, to really get into the nuts and bolts of how this happens in our minds, the study mentioned Mayer's SOI model, selection, organization, integration, and the whole idea of processing efficiency. Let's break down that framework.
Great idea. To understand what's going on in our heads when we look at visuals, this SOI model is super helpful. It breaks down learning into three main steps. First, we select what to focus on, then we organize that information in our minds, and finally, we integrate it with what we already know. And throughout all of this, there's the issue of how efficiently our brains are handling all that information.
Okay, so selection first. When we're looking at a visual, what exactly are we selecting?
It's simply focusing our attention on specific parts of the visual. It's choosing what to look at, and that determines what information gets into our working memory, that mental space where we actively process things. Think about when you're scrolling through a busy web page, your eyes naturally gravitate towards certain elements.
Right.
That's selection in action.
So if we're not focusing on the right parts, the important parts, we're not going to learn them. It seems obvious, but it also highlights a potential pitfall. We might get sidetracked by something visually interesting, but totally irrelevant to the main point.
Exactly. Our attention is a fickle thing. That's where signaling comes in.
Signaling, like using bold text or arrows to highlight things.
Exactly. Signaling uses visual cues to make the important stuff stand out. This could be color, arrows pointing to key features, bold text underlining animation, or even just clear labels. It's all about making sure the important information grabs your attention.
So the designer is essentially guiding our focus. Does this actually translate to better learning?
Research suggests it does. There was this study by Oslick and colleagues where people were learning about a jet engine from a diagram. When key terms in the text were highlighted in red, as they were mentioned, people spent more time looking at those corresponding parts of the diagram. And guess what? They were also better at finding that information later. It's like our eyes are naturally drawn to those signals.
That's really cool. The study also talked about an experiment with animations of the circulatory system.
Oh yeah, in that one, DeKoning and his team used visual contrast to emphasize different parts of the circulatory system in an animation. And the result? People spent more time looking at those highlighted areas. So it really reinforces the idea that signaling works. It helps us focus our limited attention where it matters most. The basic principle is that highlighting important information makes it easier to learn because you're guiding attention to what matters.
So highlighting helps us focus. But the study also mentioned a caveat, right? Like, signaling alone isn't some magic bullet for learning.
Right. Chris and Hegarty did a study on mechanical systems, like how a toilet flushes. They found that while signaling, using arrows in this case, did draw attention to specific parts, it didn't automatically lead to a deeper understanding of how the system worked as a whole. Just seeing the key components isn't enough. We need to actively engage with that information and figure out how it all connects.
And that leads us perfectly to the next stage, organization. Once we've picked up some information from a visual, how does our brain actually go about organizing it?
That's where we start making connections, figuring out how the pieces fit together. Organization is all about inferring relationships between those different bits of information we've selected. It's essential for properly storing that information in our long-term memory so we can recall it later. And visuals can be incredibly helpful in this process.
What kinds of relationships are we talking about here? What kind of organizational inferences do we make?
McCrudden and Rapp highlight three main types: temporal, hierarchical, and relational.
Temporal, that sounds like understanding the order of things, a sequence.
Spot on. It's about grasping the order of events, steps in a process, phases in a cycle, that kind of thing. Semantic displays, especially those sequence diagrams that use spatial arrangement to show order, they excel at this. Think about a timeline of historical events. The closer events are on the timeline, the closer they are in time.
Right, it visually represents the time sequence. The study mentions some research on those sequence diagrams, right? Something about airplanes and kidney stones?
Yeah, that was fascinating. McCrudden and colleagues found that people who studied sequence diagrams after reading about airplane lift and the formation of kidney stones in astronauts, they actually remembered the information better and could apply it to new situations better than those who just reread the text. The visual sequence seemed to solidify their understanding of the temporal relationships.
Wow, so the visual really made a difference. What about pictorial displays? Can they also help us understand sequences?
Absolutely. Both still images and animations can convey temporal information. Imagine a series of photos showing a plant growing from a seed, or an animation of a chemical reaction unfolding step by step. The changes you see, whether across space or time, they help you make sense of the sequence. Think about a visual of lightning forming. You see the initial conditions that build up a charge, then bam, the strike. It's all laid out visually.
Okay, so we can grasp sequences with both semantic and pictorial displays. Got it. What's the next type of organizational inference, hierarchical?
Hierarchical inference is about understanding how different concepts are structured in terms of levels, what's the main category, what are the subcategories, that sort of thing. Semantic displays, like your organizational charts or tree diagrams, they're perfectly suited for this. That branching structure visually represents those different levels of organization.
Like a family tree or how we categorize plants and animals in biology.
Exactly. A lot of our knowledge is organized hierarchically in our minds. So visualizing this structure, whether it's the different branches of government or the classification of rock types, it just makes it much easier to grasp those super and subordinate relationships.
Right. And what about pictorial displays when it comes to hierarchies? Do they play a role?
The research suggests that purely pictorial displays might not be as naturally suited for explicitly conveying those hierarchical relationships. However, if you add images to a hierarchical diagram, like pictures of animals on a cladogram, it can potentially enhance understanding. Those visuals make the categories more concrete and memorable.
Interesting. So semantic displays have that inherent advantage for showing hierarchical structures. What about the third type, relational inferences?
Relational inference is all about making comparisons, understanding how different facts or concepts stack up against each other, like comparing two different economic systems, or the pros and cons of different energy sources.
And what kind of visuals are best for showing these kinds of comparisons?
Matrices, those tables with rows and columns, they're the superstars for relational inferences. When you arrange the items being compared close together in that grid format, it makes it super easy to see how they relate across different dimensions.
It's like a side-by-side comparison chart.
Exactly. And the research shows that matrices can actually be more effective than just reading plain text or even outlines for this kind of learning.
Really? So there's evidence backing that up.
Absolutely. Studies have shown that when information is presented in a matrix, people tend to make more of those relational connections, those comparisons, than if they encounter the same information in a linear text format or an outline.
Interesting. What about pictorial displays? Can they help us see how things compare visually?
Yes, they can. Pictorial displays can also facilitate those relational inferences by showing us the physical or conceptual similarities and differences between objects, and also by their spatial arrangement relative to each other. Think of a diagram showing two different types of cells side by side, highlighting their key differences.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got temporal, hierarchical, and relational inferences. Sounds like both semantic and pictorial displays can help us organize information, but they each highlight different kinds of relationships. And often, a single visual can actually help us make multiple types of these inferences at the same time.
Exactly. The key takeaway here is that the way information is presented visually has a direct impact on how our brains can structure and understand those relationships. It guides our thinking.
It really does. So when we're designing visuals to help people organize information effectively, what are some practical principles we should keep in mind? The study mentioned extraction and localization.
Those are key. Extraction is all about making sure the most important information is clear and not buried in unnecessary details. It's like highlighting the main points. Localization is about keeping related pieces of information physically close together within the display.
Okay, so don't overwhelm with too much information and keep related things together visually.
Exactly. It reduces the mental effort required to find and connect the dots. Think about a diagram explaining a process. You want the labels to be close to the parts they describe. And research shows that when you combine extraction and localization, learning becomes more effective. It helps reduce cognitive load, the mental effort required to process the information. This idea of keeping related information close is called the spatial contiguity principle. It's been shown that when related text and visuals are presented near each other, it reduces the cognitive load of having to jump back and forth between them to make connections.
It makes things more intuitive, easier to follow. So we've selected the key information, we've organized it by understanding the relationships. Now comes that third piece of the puzzle, integration. What's happening in our brains at this stage?
This is where we take that organized information and connect it to our existing knowledge, our prior knowledge. It's where we start to make sense of the new information in the context of what we already know and believe. It's about building bridges between the new and the familiar.
So it's not just about the visual itself, but about what we personally bring to the table in terms of our own understanding.
Exactly. While organization is very much influenced by how the visual is structured, integration is much more about us actively engaging our prior knowledge. McCrudden and Rapp talk about two ways this can happen: passively and actively. Passive integration might happen kind of automatically just by seeing related information presented together in a well-designed visual. It might trigger those related memories, those connections. But active integration, that requires a more conscious effort on our part to find those meaningful links between the new information in the visual and what we already know.
How can you tell if someone is actively integrating information? It seems like a very internal process.
Researchers often use think aloud protocols for this. They ask people to basically talk out loud about their thought process as they're studying a visual. By analyzing what they say, they can get insights into whether they're making those connections to prior knowledge and how they're trying to make sense of the new information.
So it's about getting people to verbalize their thinking process. And does this active linking to prior knowledge actually lead to better learning?
The research strongly suggests that it does. Studies have shown that when people are encouraged to explain things to themselves as they're learning, especially when working with diagrams, they develop a deeper understanding of the material. It's that active process of connecting new visual information to what they already know that strengthens memory and allows them to apply that knowledge more effectively later on. Integration is crucial for making that new information stick and for being able to use it in different situations.
So if we want to design visuals that help people integrate new information, what can we do?
Well, we can certainly use those principles of extraction and localization that we talked about to make that key information clear and readily accessible. But we can also build in what are called constructivist activities. These are essentially learning tasks that encourage people to actively construct their own understanding, often through problem solving or experimentation.
Constructivist activities like interactive simulations or scenarios where you have to actually apply what you're seeing in the visual.
Precisely. Imagine a diagram of a complex system where you can click on different parts to see how they interact, or change variables to see the effects. By actively engaging with the visual, manipulating it, you're forced to connect it to your existing understanding and build a more robust mental model. It's not just passive observation, it's active engagement.
It's about getting those mental gears turning. Okay, so we've covered selection, organization, and integration. The last piece of this cognitive puzzle is processing efficiency. How do visual displays impact how efficiently our brains can handle information?
Processing efficiency is all about how well we can use our limited mental resources, our attention and working memory to process information. Our ability to pay attention, it's finite. And our working memory, that mental workspace where we hold and manipulate information, it also has a limited capacity.
Like our brains can only juggle so many things at once.
Exactly. Well-designed visuals can significantly improve that processing efficiency by helping us quickly select and organize the important stuff. A clear, well-structured visual reduces the mental effort required to find and connect the different pieces of information. This frees up our working memory to focus on actual understanding rather than just struggling to make sense of a cluttered or confusing visual. It's like when you're trying to compare data presented in a clear chart. You don't have to hold multiple numbers in your head while sifting through dense paragraphs of text. The visual takes care of that for you.
That sounds like a huge advantage, especially when we're dealing with complex topics. So, based on all of this, what are some key takeaways? What are some practical recommendations for designing visuals that truly support learning and understanding?
Based on the research, there are a few key principles to keep in mind. First and foremost, always support the selection of important information. You could do this through clear signaling, using those visual cues we talked about, or by extracting the essential content, getting rid of any unnecessary clutter. Second, minimize distractions. This is the coherence principle. Get rid of any visual elements that aren't absolutely necessary. Third, help with organization by localizing related information. keeping those related things close together visually. This is that spatial contiguity principle in action.
So clear signals, no distractions, and related things grouped together.
Got it. Exactly. Fourth, make sure the type of visual you choose aligns with the type of understanding you're aiming for. Use timelines for sequences, hierarchies for structures, and matrices for comparisons. Match the visual to the cognitive goal. Fifth, if you want to encourage that deeper level of understanding and integration, combine your visuals with activities that prompt learners to connect the information to their own knowledge. Get them actively involved. Sixth, always consider your audience. Their prior knowledge, their spatial abilities, even their cultural background, these can all influence how they interpret visuals. What works for one person might not work for another. And finally, remember that just because something looks easy to understand, it doesn't mean the learning will stick. You need to reinforce that learning. Include activities that encourage practice and recall to help solidify that information in long-term memory.
These are some really practical takeaways. It's clear that designing effective visuals goes way beyond just aesthetics. It's about understanding how the brain works. The study also mentioned some areas for future research. What are some of the big questions that researchers are still trying to answer about how we learn from visuals?
One area that's really important is understanding how people use visuals in real-world learning situations outside of those controlled lab settings. How do we actually interact with the diagrams in a textbook or the infographics we come across online? There's still a lot to learn there. Another big question is how to best design visuals and learning activities that really promote that deep level of integration with prior knowledge. How do we get people to not just see the information, but truly connect it to what they already know and make it their own? And then, of course, we need to keep evaluating the effectiveness of the visuals used in current educational materials. Are they truly supporting learning? Are there better ways to do it? And then there's the exciting potential of newer technologies, things like 3D and tactile displays. How can we use those to enhance learning?
It sounds like there's still so much to explore at the intersection of visuals and cognition, but this deep dive has given us a solid foundation to build on. So, to wrap things up, what's the most important message for our listeners to take away about how visual displays affect our thinking and learning?
The key takeaway is this. Effective visual displays are powerful tools that have a direct impact on how we select, organize, and integrate information. They're not just there to look pretty, they actively shape how our brains process information.
They guide our thinking.
Exactly.
So it's about being mindful of those cognitive processes, both when we're creating visuals for others to learn from and when we're on the receiving end trying to learn from the visuals we encounter every day.
Precisely. By understanding those principles we discussed, selection, organization, integration, and processing efficiency, you can become a more effective learner and a more insightful interpreter of the visual world around you.
So as you go about your day, take a moment to really look at the visual displays you encounter. It could be anything, from the news you read to the instructions you follow. Ask yourself, how might applying these principles change how you interact with those visuals and what you ultimately take away from them? What questions does this deep dive raise for you about how you use and interpret visual information? It's definitely something to think about.
It is.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time.
See you then.